5 doorways. That's all that separates you from walking with God every single day. Not 5 years of study, not 5 difficult rituals. 5 simple shifts in how you receive divine guidance. And here's what shocks people. The first way takes 30 seconds. That's it. 30 seconds to open a channel that's been closed your entire life. The third way, it happens while you sleep. And the fifth one is so powerful, so immediate, that people tell me they felt the presence of God for the first time in decades. Within minutes. Not someday. Not eventually. Right now, today. This isn't theory. This is the exact roadmap. And I need you to understand something before we begin. What you're about to discover isn't complicated. It's not reserved for monks or mystics. It doesn't require years of meditation or spiritual training. These 5 doorways are simple, almost embarrassingly simple. Which is exactly why most people miss them. They're looking for something complex, something difficult, something that requires worthiness or special knowledge. And in doing so, they walk right past the open doors. You're here because something inside you knows there's more. You've felt it in those quiet moments, that pull towards something greater. But every time you reach for it, it slips away. And you've tried everything. The books, the services, the teachers, the rituals. But that deep connection you're seeking remains elusive. And somewhere inside, you're starting to wonder if maybe it's you. Maybe you're not spiritual enough. Maybe this is reserved for other people. Let me stop you right there. This isn't your fault. You're not broken. You're not unworthy. You've simply never been taught how this actually works. That changes right now. What I'm about to share isn't theory. These are 5 specific doorways that transform your relationship with the divine from a distant hope into a living reality. Let's start with the first way. And I want you to pay close attention because this one dismantles everything you've been taught about how spiritual guidance works. The first way is this: stop seeking and start noticing. You've been trained to believe spiritual guidance is something you chase, something you earn. That's the trap. That's why you feel exhausted. Because guidance isn't something that arrives. It's already here. Right now, divine guidance is flowing through your life. It's in the thought that popped into your head this morning. The person who called unexpectedly. The song that played at the exact moment you needed it. The dream you had last night. But you missed it. You dismissed it. You called it coincidence. You were waiting for something bigger, something more dramatic. And in waiting for the extraordinary, you missed the ordinary miracles. For the next 24 hours, operate under one assumption. Every thought that brings you peace is guidance. Every impulse toward kindness is guidance. Every moment of clarity is guidance. Don't analyze it, don't question it, just notice it. Your awareness shifts. You start seeing patterns you've been blind to. You realize the divine has been speaking constantly, but you've been listening for thunder when it whispers. You have a radio in your chest, always on, always receiving, but you've been tuned to fear, to doubt, to what others think you should do. Divine guidance broadcasts on a different frequency. Most people receive guidance and immediately talk themselves out of it. They get an impulse to call someone and think, no, that's weird. They feel pulled toward a different career and think, no, that's impractical. Every time you do this, you close the doorway. You train yourself to ignore the very guidance you're begging for. The practice is simple. Notice what you're noticing. Pay attention to what catches your attention. Honor the impulses that feel aligned with peace rather than fear. The second way is this: become willing to be disturbed. You want spiritual guidance to confirm what you already believe, to make life easier, to tell you you're right. You want God to be your cheerleader, not your coach. That's not how this works. Real spiritual guidance disrupts you, challenges your assumptions, asks you to look at what you've been avoiding. It will make you uncomfortable before it sets you free. This is why many never receive clear guidance. They're not willing to hear it. They want divine approval, not divine direction. And the moment guidance asks them to change something significant, they dismiss it. If your spiritual practice only makes you feel good, you're not going deep enough. If your prayers only reinforce existing beliefs, you're not really listening. True guidance asks you to forgive people you want to hate. Let go of relationships you want to keep. Pursue paths that terrify you. Face truths you've spent years denying. Your willingness to be disturbed is your willingness to receive real guidance rather than comfortable illusions. You're in a relationship that looks perfect outside, but deep inside, persistent unease. A quiet knowing something isn't right. You pray for guidance about whether to stay or go, but you've already received the guidance. That unease is the guidance. You keep praying for clarity while ignoring the clarity you already have, asking for signs while dismissing the signs appearing, seeking direction while refusing to walk in the direction you're being shown. This is willingness to be disturbed, letting divine guidance disrupt your comfortable lies, your convenient narratives, your fear-based decisions disguised as practical choices. When you develop this willingness, everything changes. You're open to guidance that transforms your entire life. You're willing to hear hard truths, uncomfortable revelations, invitations to grow beyond who you've been. On the other side of that disturbance is freedom. Beyond that, disruption is authenticity. Past that discomfort is the life you've always sensed was possible. Are you willing? Willing to receive guidance that might ask you to change everything? Willing to hear truths that shatter your illusions? If you are, the second doorway swings wide open. The third way is this: clean your vessel. You cannot receive clear guidance through a cluttered mind, cannot hear divine whispers over unresolved trauma, cannot walk with God while carrying resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness. This isn't about moral purity. This is practical functionality. Your consciousness is the instrument through which guidance flows. If that instrument is clogged with toxic emotions and unprocessed pain, the guidance gets distorted. You're trying to hear a message through a phone line filled with static. The message is coming through, but you can't make it out clearly. The problem isn't the sender. God is always speaking, always guiding. The problem is the interference between you and the source. What creates that interference? Unhealed wounds that make you see threat where there's only opportunity. Unresolved anger that makes you interpret guidance as punishment. Judgments you're holding onto that close you off from unexpected blessings. Grudges you're nurturing that keep you stuck in the past. Victim narratives you've built your identity around that prevent you from stepping into your power. Every piece of emotional baggage distorts divine guidance, makes love look like weakness, makes intuition look like fear, makes truth look like threat, makes opportunity look like risk. You're carrying resentment towards someone who hurt you years ago. Every time you think about them, that familiar anger, that self-righteous indignation, you've convinced yourself holding on to anger is strength. But every time you replay that resentment, you're tuning your consciousness to the frequency of pain. From that frequency, divine guidance sounds like revenge, self-protection, building walls. If you clean that vessel through genuine forgiveness, divine guidance would sound like compassion, understanding, moving forward. And you'd follow that guidance into freedom. This is the practical mechanics of how consciousness works. You cannot access higher guidance from lower emotional states. Cannot hear divine wisdom while obsessing over perceived injustices. Cannot walk with God while carrying chains of unforgiveness. The practice? Regularly examine what you're holding on to. What old stories you're keeping alive. What resentments you're feeding. What wounds you're refusing to heal. Then, consciously choose to release them. Not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve to be free. You deserve clear access to divine guidance. When you do this work, the static clears, the interference fades. Suddenly you're receiving guidance with clarity you never thought possible. This is the third doorway. It remains open only through regular maintenance. Daily practice of checking your vessel, noticing what's accumulating, releasing what no longer serves. The moment you commit to cleaning your vessel, everything shifts. The guidance that was always there becomes unmistakable. The fourth way, transform your automatic actions into conscious communion. You eat, you breathe, you walk, you work, you interact with people. These aren't spiritual activities in your mind. They're just things you do to get through the day. That's the massive opportunity you're missing. Every single action can become a doorway to divine guidance. Every moment can become communion. Not by adding religious ritual, but by bringing consciousness to what you're already doing. You're eating a meal. Normally, you're distracted. On your phone, thinking about tomorrow, barely tasting the food. But what if you brought full presence, felt gratitude for the nourishment, recognized the divine in sustaining your body? That shift opens a doorway. In that moment of presence, that gratitude, you're in communion with the source. And from that communion, guidance flows. You might suddenly remember something important. Get clarity about a decision. Feel peace about a troubling situation. This isn't magic. When you're present, when you're grateful, when you're recognizing the sacred in the ordinary, you're tuned to the frequency where divine guidance lives. Most people never discover this because they're sleepwalking, performing actions mechanically, going through motions without being present, and they wonder why they feel disconnected. You're disconnected because you're living on autopilot. Divine guidance cannot reach you when you're not home. The practice is this. Pick one ordinary activity today. Maybe your morning coffee, maybe a shower, maybe driving to work. Bring complete presence to it. Notice everything, feel everything. Be grateful for it. And watch what happens. Watch how that simple act of presence opens a channel. Watch how guidance finds you in unexpected moments. This is what it means to walk with God constantly. Not praying every second, not being in church all day, but bringing consciousness to your life, transforming automatic actions into opportunities for communion, recognizing that there is no separation between sacred and mundane. When you do this consistently, your entire life becomes a conversation with the divine. You're not waiting for special moments to connect. You're connected all the time. But it requires this shift, this commitment to presence, this willingness to wake up and actually experience your life. Think about how you interact with people. Most of the time, you're not really there, thinking about what you'll say next, judging them, distracted by your phone. But what if you brought full presence, really listened, looked for the divine in the person before you? Recognize this moment as an opportunity to experience and express love. That shift transforms everything. You're not just having conversations, you're having communion. Through that communion, divine guidance flows both ways. This is the fourth doorway, available in every moment of every day. You don't need special circumstances. You just need to wake up, to be present, to transform automatic actions into conscious communion. This is what walking with God actually looks like. Not some ethereal experience reserved for monasteries, but living, breathing, constant communion happening in the middle of your ordinary life when you bring consciousness to it. The fifth way, learn to trust before you understand. This is where most people completely block their access to divine guidance. They want understanding before they act, certainty before they move, the entire path laid out before they take the first step. That's not how divine guidance works. That's not how faith works. Divine guidance often comes as a nudge towards something that makes no logical sense. An impulse to make a call you can't explain. An urge to take a different route. A feeling that you should say yes when your logical mind screams no. And it rarely comes with explanations. It doesn't justify itself. It just whispers, just nudges, just pulls. And then it waits to see if you'll trust it. In that moment, you have a choice. You can demand understanding first. Wait for proof. Insist on seeing the whole staircase. Or you can trust. Act on the guidance even though you don't understand it yet. Move in faith rather than fear. This separates people who occasionally receive guidance from people who actually walk with God. Walking requires movement. And divine guidance often asks you to move before you can see where you're going. You feel called to leave a job that pays well but drains your soul. Your logical mind presents every reason why this is terrible. Bills. Responsibilities. People depending on you. No guarantee something better is waiting. But the guidance is clear. The inner knowing undeniable. You're meant to leave. To trust. to take the step without seeing the entire path. Most people don't. They override the guidance with logic, stay in situations, killing them slowly because fear of the unknown is stronger than faith in divine direction. And they wonder why their life never changes. You're stuck because you're waiting for understanding before you trust. The divine doesn't work that way. The divine asks you to trust first, move first, act in faith. The understanding comes after. The clarity comes through movement. The path reveals itself as you walk it. This is terrifying. It means surrendering control, accepting uncertainty, taking action without guarantees. When you insist on understanding before you trust, you're essentially telling the divine you don't actually believe in guidance. You're saying, "I'll follow you, but only if you explain everything first." That's not walking with God. That's walking with your own limited understanding while hoping for divine approval. That's faith with a safety net, which isn't really faith at all. Real faith is terrifying. Real trust is vulnerable. Real surrender means taking action based on inner knowing even when outer circumstances contradict it, even when people think you're crazy. But here's what happens when you develop this capacity, when you learn to trust before understanding, when you act on divine guidance even when it doesn't make sense. Miracles happen. Doors open. Opportunities appear. Resources show up. This is the fifth doorway, and it remains closed to everyone who needs certainty before they move. It remains closed to everyone who demands the entire map before they start the journey. It remains closed to everyone who trusts their fear more than their faith. But when you walk through this doorway, when you develop the courage to trust before you understand, you enter a completely different relationship with the divine. You're no longer negotiating. You're no longer demanding proof. You're no longer trying to control the process. You're simply listening, trusting, and acting. And from that place, divine guidance flows with an intensity and clarity that will absolutely transform your life. Let me give you a practice for this. The next time you receive guidance that doesn't make logical sense, don't immediately dismiss it. Don't rush to analyze it. Don't poll your friends for their opinions. Just sit with it. Feel into it. Notice if it comes from fear or faith. Notice if it brings you peace or anxiety. And if it feels like truth even though you don't understand it, act on it. Take one small step in that direction. Trust before you understand. And watch what happens. Watch how that small act of trust creates movement. Watch how the next step becomes visible only after you take the first one. Watch how divine guidance responds to your faith by providing more guidance, more clarity, more direction. This is how you build a relationship with the divine. Not through intellectual understanding, not through demanding explanations, but through repeated acts of trust, through choosing faith over fear, through taking action based on inner knowing even when outer circumstances seem to argue against it. And over time, this becomes your new normal. You stop needing to understand everything before you move. You stop demanding certainty before you act. You develop a deep trust in divine guidance that allows you to walk through life with confidence even in the midst of uncertainty, because you know that you're being led, you know that you're being guided, you know that you're not alone. This is what it means to walk with God, not to have all the answers, not to see the entire path, but to trust the guidance enough to take the next step, and then the next, and then the next, until you look back and realize you've been led perfectly all along. Let's bring all 5 ways together. Separately, they're powerful. Combined, you create a life of constant divine communion. This is where the magic happens. This is where everything clicks. Because these 5 ways aren't meant to be practiced in isolation. They work together. They amplify each other. They create a synergy that transforms your entire relationship with the divine. Think about it this way. When you stop seeking and start noticing, you begin to see the guidance that's always been there. But if your vessel is cluttered with resentment and old wounds, you'll misinterpret that guidance. You'll see it through the filter of your pain. So you need to clean your vessel. And when you clean your vessel, you can receive guidance more clearly. But if you're not willing to be disturbed, you'll only accept guidance that makes you comfortable. You'll reject the very messages that could set you free. So you need to develop that willingness. When you're willing to be disturbed and your vessel is clean, you start receiving profound guidance. But if you're living on autopilot, moving through your days unconsciously, you'll miss the moment-by-moment communion that's available. So you need to transform your automatic actions into conscious presence. And when you're present, when you're noticing, when you're clean, when you're willing, you'll receive guidance that asks you to take action. Action that doesn't make logical sense. Action that requires faith. And that's where trust comes in. Without trust, you'll receive the guidance but never act on it. And guidance without action is just interesting information. You see how they work together? How each one supports and strengthens the others? This isn't a linear process. It's a spiral, a dance, a continuous flow of receiving and responding, of listening and acting, of being guided and moving forward. You stop seeking and start noticing. You see guidance everywhere. In every thought, every impulse, every synchronicity, you're recognizing the subtle signs happening constantly. You become willing to be disturbed. You don't just want comfortable guidance that confirms your existing beliefs. You're open to guidance that challenges you, disrupts you, transforms you. You're willing to hear hard truths and take difficult actions because you trust that divine guidance always leads to your highest good, even when it's uncomfortable. You clean your vessel regularly. You don't carry old resentments, unprocessed trauma, or toxic emotions that distort your ability to receive clear guidance. You forgive. You release. You let go. You maintain clarity of consciousness so guidance can flow through you unobstructed. You transform your automatic actions into conscious communion. Every moment becomes an opportunity to connect with the divine. Every task becomes sacred. Every interaction becomes meaningful. You're not waiting for special spiritual experiences. You're living in constant communion through the ordinary moments of your daily life. And you trust before you understand. You act on guidance even when it doesn't make logical sense. You take steps in faith. You move toward what calls you even when you can't see the entire path. You develop a relationship with the divine based on trust rather than control, faith rather than fear. When you live this way, when you practice all five consistently, your life transforms. Not slowly, not eventually, but immediately. Because you're no longer disconnected from divine guidance. You're no longer wandering in confusion. You're walking with God through every moment of your existence. And here's what that actually looks like in your day-to-day life. It's not some ethereal, floating on clouds experience. It's practical. It's real. It's grounded. You wake up with clarity about how to spend your day. Not because you planned everything perfectly, but because you're receiving moment-by-moment guidance about where to direct your energy. You know which opportunities to pursue and which to decline. Not through endless analysis, but through inner knowing. You know who to spend time with and who to release, not through judgment, but through recognizing what aligns with your path and what doesn't. You know when to speak and when to be silent, when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to surrender. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you're connected, because you're listening, because you're in constant dialogue with the divine. The anxiety that used to plague you starts to dissolve, because you're no longer carrying the burden of figuring everything out alone. You're being guided. You're being led. And you can feel it. Decisions that used to paralyze you become simple. Situations that used to confuse you become clear. Relationships that used to drain you either transform or naturally fall away. You move through life with peace and purpose you never thought possible. This isn't reserved for saints or mystics. This isn't something requiring years of spiritual practice. This is available to you right now, today, through these 5 doorways. But reading about these ways isn't the same as practicing them. Agreeing with concepts isn't the same as living them. Feeling inspired isn't the same as implementing. The transformation happens in the application, in the practice, in the daily choice to walk through these doorways. So, what will you do with what you've heard today? Will you let this be another interesting conversation that changes nothing? Or will you actually practice these ways? Because that's the difference between people who talk about spiritual growth and people who actually experience it. The difference is practice. The difference is choosing to walk through these doorways every single day. You're ready for this. You wouldn't be here listening if you weren't ready. Something inside you has been calling you toward this deeper connection. And that calling is itself guidance. The divine inviting you to come closer, to wake up. You're not just a physical being trying to have spiritual experiences. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience. And walking with God isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about remembering what you've always been. It's about removing the barriers you've built between yourself and the divine presence that has never left you. Think about that for a moment. The divine hasn't been absent from your life. You've been absent from your awareness of the divine. God hasn't stopped speaking. You've stopped listening. The guidance hasn't stopped flowing. You've stopped receiving. And all of these barriers, the seeking instead of noticing, the resistance to being disturbed, the cluttered vessel, the unconscious living, the demand for understanding before trust, these are all forms of protection. Ways you've learned to keep yourself safe. Ways you've learned to stay in control. But that safety is an illusion. That control is costing you everything. It's costing you the very thing you're desperately seeking: connection, communion, the experience of walking with God. Those barriers are dissolving right now. With every word you're absorbing, with every insight you're receiving, the distance you felt between yourself and God is closing. Not because God is moving toward you, but because you're finally moving toward God. When you walk through these 5 doorways consistently, when you make these practices the foundation of your daily life, you will never feel lost again. You will never feel alone again. Because you'll be walking with divine guidance through every moment. The life you've been searching for, the peace you've been chasing, the purpose you've been seeking, it's all waiting on the other side of these doorways. Not in some distant future. Not after you become perfect. Not when circumstances finally align. But now, today, in this moment. All you have to do is walk through. All you have to do is practice. All you have to do is choose to stop living unconsciously and start walking consciously with the divine presence that has been with you all along. So here's my invitation to you. Start today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. Right now. Pick one of these 5 ways and practice it. Just one. Maybe you choose to notice, to pay attention to the guidance that's already flowing, to stop dismissing the synchronicities. Maybe you choose to become willing to be disturbed, to stop demanding that guidance make you comfortable, to listen to the uncomfortable feelings instead of numbing them. Maybe you choose to clean your vessel, to finally release that resentment, to forgive that person who hurt you, to clear the static so the signal can come through pure. Maybe you choose to transform one automatic action into conscious communion, to bring full presence to your morning coffee, to really listen in your next conversation. Or maybe you choose to trust before you understand, to act on that guidance you've been receiving but ignoring, to take that step even though you can't see the whole path. Just one. Just today. And watch what happens. Watch how that one practice opens something inside you. Watch how divine guidance responds to your willingness. Watch how walking with God becomes less of a distant hope and more of a daily reality. Because this is your birthright. This is what you came here for. Not to struggle alone. Not to figure everything out by yourself. Not to stumble through life hoping you're on the right path, but to walk with God. To receive clear guidance. To live in constant communion with the source of all wisdom, all love, all truth. The doorways are open. The invitation is clear. The path is laid out before you. All that remains is your choice. Will you walk through? Will you practice? Will you commit to living in connection with divine guidance rather than in the isolation of your own limited understanding? You already know the answer. You felt it the moment you started listening to these words. Something inside you recognized truth. Something inside you said yes. That's the divine speaking to you right now. That's guidance telling you that you're ready, that it's time, that this is your moment to stop reading about spiritual connection and start living it. So walk through these doorways, practice these ways, and discover what it really means to live in constant communion with the divine. Not as some distant goal, not as some future possibility, but as your present reality, starting now, starting today. starting with the very next breath you take. This is how you walk with God. This is how you receive divine guidance. This is how you transform from someone who occasionally feels connected to someone who lives in constant communion, through these 5 doorways, through these 5 practices, through this commitment to wake up and finally receive what's been waiting for you all along.